when you're like starting a company, it's like you're driving a jet like straight down to the earth. First rule of business is don't die. Second rule is don't die. Third rule is remember rules 1 and 2.
I think of gaslighting yourself as being one of the most powerful things you can possibly do as a human being.
Why is Ozempic flying off the shelves and not gym memberships? People want things given to them. Hey, I recruited you to this team for a reason. I believe in you.
Are you secretly a competitor to like the Metaverse?
Should even a handful of these companies succeed that we're referencing here, the world might look quite considerably different.
Welcome to episode 8 of 3Course Founders, where we have deeper conversations with entrepreneurs who are building the future. And today, that conversation is with Eric Wollberg. He's the co-founder and CEO of Prophetic. It's a venture-backed startup, a non-invasive neurotech company, building a device to induce and stabilize lucid dreams. The first device is called Halo. Once it's on your head, it runs Morpheus 1, a multimodal AI model trained on brain data, and then triggers neurostimulation using targeted ultrasound. Beyond building something that sounds like it's from the future, Eric is a super thoughtful founder, and you're going to hear it in my conversation today about the technology itself, what he's trying to achieve in helping people control their lucid dreams, both literally, but also from a philosophical perspective, a societal perspective. He thinks about storytelling, fundraising for Prophetic, building a team around such an ambitious device. We get into a lot of really deep content here. This one's truly for the startup nerds out there. And a shout out to our friends at Sagaponic. It's an Asian Mediterranean restaurant in New York City in Flatiron. They were great hosts, and as always, the food was delicious. If you're in the neighborhood, you gotta check it out. So let me not hold this back any longer. Here's episode 8 of 3Course Founders with Eric Wollberg, co-founder, CEO at Prophetic.
All right, we're here at 3Course Founders. I'm super excited for this one because I'm talking to you, Eric. You are the founder of Prophetic. You are building something very dreamy, is the way I'll put it. And we're here at Sagaponic in Manhattan. We're going to have 3 different courses here. It's a fantastic place. I've been before. Have you ever been to Sagaponic before?
I don't think I have, actually.
You are in for a treat. Food's delicious. Vibes are immaculate. But why don't we get started? I am super excited to have our first meal, our first course.
Let's do it.
And then we'll get into unique market insights that you bring to the table.
Happy to do it.
Awesome. Here we go. It is time.
All right. We have our Just Oyster Trio.
Awesome. Oh.
We have a cucumber oyster, caviar oyster, and a Thai chili oyster. And then we have our fluke tartare, which is fluke topped with tobiko, marcona almonds, scallions, and then a coconut and cilantro dressing.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. Wow, this stuff looks incredible. I don't want to do too much shilling. We never do on 3Course Founders on the product. But I do want to talk about it a little bit, and that's because I think people might not appreciate how close we are in terms of kind of our ability to build products that, you know, truly come from sci-fi or the future. So again, even though I loathe to do it, let's get it out of the way. What's the 5 to 10 liner on what you're building?
Sure. So Prophetic, we're building a consumer neurotech device. We utilize machine learning paired with a neuromodulation technology called transcranial focus ultrasound, or tFUS for short. And we use that neuromodulation technology to essentially, either inhibit or activate neural circuits in the brain. And we're really hyper interested and focused on this one neural circuit, which has the very unique, result of inducing what's called a lucid dream. To define our terms, we're talking about the awareness that you're in a dream that begets the control of the phenomenological contents of that dream at will. So what you imagine becomes.
Something I, by the way, have not, sadly, I don't think I've had.
You haven't had.
I know about, and, you know, philosophically, I'm super fascinated by.
Sure. So about 55% of people self-report having had it at least once in their life. And a smaller percentage of people have a natural proclivity for it. And I'm part of that second lucky group.
Yeah.
So that's how I kind of got into this. I had my first lucid dream when I was like 12 years old. I woke up and was like equal parts terrified and excited.
Do you remember what it was?
So I was like flying and yeah, this is delicious.
Yeah.
Like flying and talking to dream characters and things like that. And I woke up and I was equal parts excited and terrified. Like, excited because it was extraordinary. Terrified because I had never heard anyone talk about it. Like Hagrid didn't pick me up on my 11th birthday. So like, what's going on? And I'm 30, so there were like early internet forums, and I found these early internet forums talking about this thing called lucid dreaming, sigh of relief. Other people do this. And I guess broadly, like, I've just, it became such a profound like experience for me, like on a metaphysical level. I'm kind of a hopelessly curious person that's gone like an inch deep and a mile wide. And I was like, I really want to go deep. And what I decided when I was about 24 was I'm going to choose an ultimate question. Because if I choose an ultimate question, like the chances that I answer that question is like approaching zero, right? Like we've been asking these questions for thousands of years. And what is consciousness was the question that I was most interested to answer, and I thought that lucid dreaming was a good vector of attack, and I knew that forming a company was going to be the modality by which I did this.
What age are you definitive about deciding this is the mission?
Every single thing that I've done between the ages of 24 and 29 were in service of starting Prophetic.
So interesting.
Yeah.
Continue, please.
So yeah, I mean, neurotech, you kind of have this very barbell thing. And I know you kind of wanted to touch on this.
Yeah.
You have, on one end, you have like Neuralink and BlackRock, right? So invasive BCIs, BlackRock Neuro, by the way, not BlackRock, the finance company.
And BCI being brain-computer interface.
Correct, yeah. And, it's really extraordinary stuff. People have probably seen a lot of the things that Neuralink has done most recently. And they're definitely the most aggressive. I think they're aiming to do something like 20 to 30,000 surgeries by 2030 a year. Now, of course, that's not consumer. That's people who are quadriplegic, congenitally blind, etc.
Medical.
Yeah, correct. And I always say this, like, even if it was close, like a lot of people are very effusive about this, and I'm very interested in it as well. But when your head's below the surgical robot, like, let's see how excited you are. It's a pretty big thing to kind of get something in your brain.
What number person do you want to be to go to Mars?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, right, exactly.
Well, before you continue, because we're about to go down an interesting path, let's set it up a little bit. So to your point, I want to talk about this because the first course is always the unique market insight.
Yeah.
And you and I chatted a little about this whole concept of the barbell of like, and when you first said it to me, unprompted, when we were chatting about what you're building, I immediately found it fascinating from a builder's perspective in terms of the proximity of what you're trying to do with Prophetic and the lucid dreaming device, and how soon that could become reality versus something longer term, like a Neuralink that has maybe some short-term or near-term use cases, but is mostly, I don't know if this is true or not, and I'd be curious actually your opinion, not going to be mass adoption probably until the end of our lifetimes.
I'd be a little more optimistic than that, but it's decades away.
Decades away. How much of the choice to go medical or use case specific that has a pain point versus general and something like lucid dreaming where you're going to, I assume, say everyone can pick this up?
Yeah.
Are you giving up on or delaying, not giving up on, a different dream? Is there some other device you already have in mind? Maybe V7 of Prophetic?
Yeah. Okay, there was a lot there.
Yeah.
But I think, with respect to Neuralink in particular, as it pertains to the question, things like Utah arrays, which were actually, built by BlackRock Neuro, which predates Neuralink by quite some time, already existed. Really,
what are these?
These are essentially the arrays that actually can kind of go into the brain and so on and so forth, like the threads. And, they were doing things, but things were going much slower and so on and so forth. And there was a lot of form factor issues, right? How do you make it kind of comfortable, easy to insert, but also easy to wear? How do you charge it? All these different things, right? And that's, I think, where, they've made a lot of strides on the core technology as well. But like, that's where I think, right, Neuralink, really excelled, was like the surgical robot. How do you do the surgery? Doing, like, how do you charge it, et cetera,
even as a very tech nerd, addicted to Twitter, feels relatively knowledgeable about this stuff. I did not realize that was one of the main breakthroughs.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's the use, it's the wireless to actually implement.
Yeah,
it's integration.
Yeah. So it's about it's about building something that people can really use. Yeah. And I think like if anything, like Elon's really good at taking something and productizing it, and really and the teams that he builds, to execute that. I mean, the team at Neuralink I've talked to a couple of them, are amazing. I think like you take that approach because first of all, there is a market for it today. There are quadriplegics today. There are congenitally blind people today. And, it's fantastic there are people who are attacking that problem. And if anything, I think I would say that more resources should flow to those companies. I think on the other end of the spectrum, right, you have these kind of what have been mostly neural feedback, devices. So these EEG, devices, usually paired with content, really like some of these pioneering companies were like Muse and Mendy, etc. The issue is that neural feedback is extremely hard to generalize. It's like you can go to a university and do neural feedback therapy, and it's like people are focused on you, super legitimate.
What does it look like, by the way, when you say neural feedback? Are we talking about the ability to influence or analyze or track or all of the above?
So it's basically EEG, generally speaking, could be fNIRS, but a different kind of neuroimaging technique. In a headband, it's taking your neural data in real time, and there's usually content in it in the form of an app that's trying to essentially guide you to a given state, a meditative state, calm, sleep.
So the device, and we can talk specifically about the device you're building. What's the device called?
The Halo.
The Halo. I've seen an image and it looks super cool.
Thank you. The people who designed the first iteration of Neuralink designed that.
Oh,
Card 79, give them a shout out. They're awesome.
That's awesome. And that's doing analysis such that content, as you're using, I like this framework of content because that could probably mean more than what we traditionally think of as content.
Sure.
But essentially it means there are a variety of things that you already either know or are discovering can be done once you have enough information through neural feedback. In other words, some of this near-termedness is because you already imagined as a lucid dreamer, hey, there's clearly some things that are different about us, and if we could understand that a little bit more, maybe there's some stuff we could do today that doesn't require injecting or doing something invasive from a surgical perspective.
Yeah, I think the way I would discuss it is like, so you had these EEG companies, this, and so on and so forth. They did a lot of great things on hardware and bringing the cost down of EEG and so on and so forth and scaling the manufacturing for that. I think, if it was 10, 15 years ago, for a startup to purchase EEG equipment would be like far more expensive than, had those companies not existed.
Yeah.
And so, technology, there's like these tech trees, and sometimes some people subsidize like the cost of the thing that actually really works, right?
Yeah. I love the framing. I often use it of tech is underrated as thinking about what we're building in terms of a tech tree.
Yeah, and me too. And I very much think about that, like, because you can really tell. I mean, ultrasound as a diagnostic tool, right? Was before you was
and even
far
from a UX
below.
perspective, an AirPod unlocks so much from a UX perspective.
Sure.
Not just the literal technology, but also the idea of like what we're accepting and what we're deciding is a standard.
Totally. And so, So okay, but like, EEG neural feedback doesn't really scale. It doesn't really work very well at scale, I should say. And my joke here is always like, why is Ozempic flying off the shelves and not gym memberships? And the reason is that people want things given to them. They don't want to do the work. Neural feedback is work. Even if it worked, it is just a very involved thing. And so, if I know two things, really three things I should say. It's if there's going to be a winning consumer neurotech company in the 2020s, it's going to be non-invasive neuromodulation. It's that neuromodulation technology is going to be transcranial focused ultrasound, and we can get into that, the reasons why. And it's got to have an experience that it's inducing that is non-trivial. Like, it can't just be trying to replace my Diet Coke.
I like
Diet Coke.
This point. I love this point.
Yeah.
Can I tell you why I love
Please.
this point so much? I get into this a lot. We do this thing called the feedback loop where early stage founders come to pitch to me and a fellow venture investor every single Tuesday at our offices. And so we hear a lot of early stage pitches in wellness. And whether they bring it up or I bring up or the judge brings up like Apple Watches or Whoops or Oura rings and all these devices, you're not wearing any of them, I believe.
No, just a wedding ring.
I'm not going to imply that like that's a statement you're making about the world, but maybe I am. I'm not wearing any of them.
Yeah.
And these devices essentially, they've given us analysis without content to use your language or content that creates meaningful experiences. As much as we got excited about, let's call it a 3-year phase of every one of the devices we could put on ourselves, then came the Reddit posts that were like, why does my Oura disagree with my Whoop Band, disagree with my Apple Watch? Which isn't, fine, they're all going to get better. I'm not making that critique. It's more so that was clearly an indication. We were looking at the data and going, why is this important? Why is it different? Because it wasn't doing something for the person, right? They didn't ask that question because, my Oura ring was great and I fixed my sleep. They were going, this data seems questionable, or I don't know how actionable it is. Let me also try this other device. What am I supposed to do with this? I don't understand my experiences of wearables in the 2020 to 2024 time period. And it's this lack of ability to create a meaningful change, right? There's no before and after.
Yeah.
If you're wearing an Oura ring, you look different.
Yeah.
And again, I have had 2 of them. I lost both of them.
We use them.
Yeah, they're a very interesting device. I often think about these as like imagination agitating products. They're not yet the thing they're supposed to be.
Yeah.
But that's a super interesting point, that idea.
I mean, I think that maybe it's the benefit of being in New York as opposed to San Francisco and Silicon Valley. But, if you're a very quantified self, very tech-enabled individual, right? Yeah. You're kind of using all these like technologies to do something that like you probably like would do anyway, or there's a different way to kind of do it. Like I have an 8 sleep, and it's like, if you check the score, I realized I stopped checking the score. Because I'm like, wait a second, like I know what I feel like. Because there were times where I felt like I slept well and I was like, but it said like 75. And I was like, fuck.
It's controlling you.
Yeah, and it was, because your mind is a very powerful thing. Like you can, and so I just think that like, this, and by the way, I think 8 Sleep is a fantastic product. I mean, I would say it's probably the second most important technology that I've bought since my iPhone.
But probably more so for the ability to make you cold at night.
Yeah, no, 1,000. It's just that, right? Like, I don't need the analytics.
We know what we need to do.
Oh, and I like that it vibrates as an alarm. But like, other than that, like,
Oh, it does?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it's great.
I kind of need it for that now.
So there's that. But also, like, again, I think in neurotech and in neurostimulation companies that have existed and so on and so forth, and some of them have raised gargantuan sums of money, not to really hit it, with anything big. They focus on these kind of incremental experiences that already exist. So like focus or, here, let me rip this.
Yeah, have that oyster. We are getting even more food here at Sagaponic, which
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Here, this is your salad.
Thank you very much.
No, because it's all delicious. We need to finish all of it. Thank you.
But yeah, I mean, they focus on these experiences. They're trying to replace a behavior, let's say, that's existed forever. So for example, focus.
Right.
I drink coffee.
Right.
You drink coffee?
I love coffee.
I love coffee.
10 p.m. coffee.
It makes me focus, but I love coffee. I like the act of making coffee.
Ritual.
The ritual. And, and so we have to really think about also making sure that we're not doing things where we're trying to replace things that people already enjoy. And moreover, you obviously then also need to have an experience that, again, I think is non-trivial.
Well, it's funny too. I don't know why this is coming up because it wasn't, the ritual isn't literally the thing here. But dreams are not also 100% enjoyable is an interesting concept here.
Right.
Not to talk specifically about your product, but I think it's important. It's interesting that you're modifying something that we all mostly do to different extents that we understand or remember or recall or feel or whatever. So I guess the impact is different depending on who you are. But it's fascinating because now I've reframed Prophetic in my mind. Already an interesting company, already something I don't get to do that I'd love to do.
Sure.
How soon can you make me lucid dream, by the way? How far away are we?
I mean, we publicly talk about kind of Q4 2025 as releasing devices, but that's actually really much more to do with, how fast you can scale manufacturing and quality assurance.
So you're going to make me lucid dream much sooner.
We'll work on it.
I love it. But so the idea though of dreams they have high variance, right?
Yeah.
The user experience of a dream right now is high variance, and you're actually, as a product, essentially just creating a lower variance experience and driving towards optimal outcomes.
Yeah, well, so a few things. Yeah, so one, for example, today I'm happy to take you to my office. Like I can increase your focus. I can make you happy. I can do a lot of fun waking state neuromod. It's not enough.
Everyone's tried.
It's just not. It's not enough. It's not enough of an experience in my mind to make $1 billion, $10 million company. The thing with lucid dreaming, not to get too specific, of course, to it, is what's great is you get them to this state and you get everything. You get the magic for free. Like, because it's your brain, it's your mind, it's your consciousness. And you talk about variance. Yeah, sure, dreams are highly varied. By the way, one thing to be very important is that when you're lucid, you have your working memory is active. And so you remember. So the memory recall or dream recall is very different, if you're lucid because you have, you form short-term memory, integrate long-term memory, etc. And you talked about kind of collapsing variance, but then kind of moving towards preferences, I guess you'd say. But what's fantastic about lucidity is, the combinatorial nature of what you can do is quite large, right? I mean, you can do things that you simply could not do because the laws of physics wouldn't allow you. And I wrote a piece on this called the qualia takeoff scenario, where it's just like the number of possible, the qualia takeoff scenario. So kind of like a parallel of the AI takeoff scenario. I mean, the way I would talk about this is like, think about
are you using qualia?
Qualia.
Okay, that comes from, that's a startup, right?
Might be
name?
There might be I'm sure there's a company there. It comes from Charles Pierce Quale. He's a philosopher in the 19th century, and basically it's just like the unit of a conscious experience. So the red or the taste of coffee or Diet Coke, etc., whatever, and the kind of the kind of entirety of that forms with one conscious experience. And if you think about like our ancestors, like I'll use me, right? 300 years ago, my ancestors were probably in the shtetl, okay, and there wasn't much going on, right? Like life was just very constrained. And I remember I had a conversation with a gentleman named Bern Hobart. I don't know if you know Bern Hobart. He writes the diff.
Totally.
Super smart guy. And I got a chance to talk to him, and he said, Eric, do you know why stained glass windows were so popular in Gothic Europe? And I said, no, Bern, why don't you tell me? And he said, well, think about it. To a Gothic peasant, a stained glass window was one of the most extraordinary things they would see in their entire life. And, just think about the vibrancy and the psychedelic almost quality of this. And to have it ascribed to God was perfect, right? Now,
which is also a resource limitation.
Right. And so as you fast forward, right, you get like the phonograph. So then you get artificial music.
Right.
And then you get the Lumiere brothers with film. I don't know if you've ever seen one of my favorite things in technology ever captured was this audience was the first time they'd ever seen a movie. And they're standing there, and the movie is a train coming towards the camera, and everyone freaks out. Because think about it, like from an evolutionary perspective, everything that any of their ancestor had ever seen was real.
Are all of the reinforced learning?
Yeah, and you can kind of think of human technological development for consumer or recreational use experiences are this step function shift in increasing the number of possible conscious experiences, and not only digitally, by the way. Like we can get on an airplane right now and go to Tokyo. The number of conscious experiences increase. And I think of lucidity, frankly, as because of the combinatorial nature of it, it could be a very tremendous inflection point for that.
I don't intend to do this because I wanted to stick in the market insight, but I have to ask more questions.
Sure,
I have to.
I'm sorry.
No, it's so good because here's an interesting potential tangent, or you're going to go, of course I've been thinking about this. Are you secretly a competitor to like the metaverse? Because fundamentally, while you're talking, a lot of what I was beginning to think about is the alternative conscious experience that some companies are trying to create. And I believe in theirs too, to be clear, is this idea of the Ready Player One or this metaverse. Everyone thought Zuckerberg was wrong to invest. And the entire time I was going, you don't think most people who, by the way, I say this kind of with sadness, who lead sad lives and don't have access to resources or wealth or whatever it is.
Mark Andreessen called this reality privilege.
Reality privilege, exactly. People who don't have that reality privilege are going to strap a headset to their face, and they're going to live in this alternative consciousness. Yeah. It's interesting to think, even at the very practical level for a moment, like, is that secretly a competitor where you're saying there's an alternative way to have fictional experience or like an experience that's beyond yourself or your physical limitation?
Sure. So I guess first of all, I mean, one thing I would say is I think I'm a lot more optimistic on the state of the future in the sense that like abundance, energy abundance,
the physical future.
So I think, the hope would be, first of all, just like over time, right, reality privilege dissipates.
Yeah.
But listen, I mean, maybe they have the day and we have the night or something like that. There's kind of a lot of time in the day.
So we're always strapped in.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
but it's not a bad thing, right?
No,
I don't say that, in a
and by the way, like to be clear, like we really are probably aiming to do like to give. There's good, we want to follow the research here. Like there's good research that shows like lucid dreaming once or twice a week is net positive for restfulness. I don't think you should probably have a technologically induced lucid dream like every single day for months and months and months. So we're going to rate limit it anyway. And so that's like really important to say. I think like maybe though, which in the way that we would kind of inadvertently compete with them or affect them would be if like how satiated could you potentially be if you had this experience regularly? Like, would you seek out the metaverse, or would you have like such an extraordinary experience once or twice, a week at night that actually in the day what you seek out is something very different?
Wow.
I don't know. I mean, we'd have to know how society reacts to this.
What you're saying that brings me to is like, we're in a loneliness epidemic.
Yeah.
We have an addiction problem, a variety of addictions that people have to digital media, whatever it might be. And a lot of people don't see this as as the sum of essentially a bunch of unmet desires. And I think what you're saying that's really interesting there is the reason people fall into these traps, and the reason if we have all these epidemics and problems on a demographic level, is because we've set a lot of traps. This is one of the things that I think you and I have been talking politics for a while before the show, and one of the things that my leftist hemisphere liberal brain always says, I'm very paternalistic, obviously that's where those politics come from. We have to understand why these things happen. But then my capitalistic brain, my startup brain goes, but we have to give people resource positive and self-directed solutions.
Right.
And so to allow somebody to experience, let's say, a lucid dream where they are getting a satisfaction, a wholeness, a satiation that they don't get otherwise.
I want to step back and correct satiation would be a word that I wouldn't want to use. But let me tell you what I think is going on, which is probably kind of at this, like, I think the foundation level of kind of all of these problems. When I wrote the introductory piece to launch Prophetic, it's called Dreaming of a Theory of Consciousness. At the end, I talked about this concept called empirical metaphysics, or metaphysical empiricism, excuse me. And so the idea there is like, first of all, we have like already, right, like this boring Nietzschean phrase at this point, right, of we killed God, right? We did. Secular society is very much, kind of on the rise. And really the issue is that it's hard to tell a modern person with science and technology around them have faith.
Right.
At the same time, if you look at highly secularized societies, I think you just see like enormous existential grief.
Right.
I think that the person who's seeking the Balenciaga or even the ayahuasca retreat are both doing the same behavior, which is they have a God-shaped hole and nothing to fill it. And you can't fill it with Balenciaga, and I don't even know if you could fill it with ayahuasca. Now, the thing that's important is like, okay, the metaphysical questions matter. Like that's why we've been asking them for thousands and thousands of years, and we've created religions that organized our society for most of it. Most of human, recorded in human history. But we need to have an actual path towards answering them. And so, the first slide in the first pitch deck I used to raise our pre-seed round had this quote from the Second Industrial Revolution that like, we learn more about the laws of thermodynamics by the invention of the steam engine than the reverse, which is simply to say that like, it is by engineering things that we understand them. And then I wrote, we're building a steam engine for consciousness. And I think, at its best, what we would want Prophetic to be is this collective, here's your ship. Everyone gets a ship essentially. And we're on this collective journey to answer this question that we all care about. We all want to answer this because what is consciousness is the most intimate way really of saying like, what am I? And what the fuck is going on? So I think that's why I wouldn't want to say satiate. I'd want it to reinvigorate or re-enliven, re-enchant, the world.
It's so interesting because to someone founder to founder, when you say these things, I dig them. I see the product spirit behind them. I see like the motivation as a founder behind them. When you release the first version of this that you want everyone to buy, will the marketing say any of this, or will it say, tonight you can lose a dream for like X number of dollars?
Sleep with your favorite celebrity?
Yeah, and I ask that question deeply because I think one of the things that I'm fascinated by in our conversation, I think we have a similar spirit in terms of like, we're building things for like long-term reasons. And I feel like we're gonna get to this somewhat in course 2 as well. But I think there's always the fight in that moment to go like, what does the market thinks it wants? And that's deeply embedded in the questions you're asking of like, do they understand their own consciousness? Do they understand? Do you want them to understand it, by the way, as part of it?
Yeah.
Whether it's the God-shaped hole, the secular rise, whatever it is, part of that is, I don't say this again to diminish, but people don't understand that that's happening to them as a demographic.
Of course, yeah. I think, so there are two ways you can kind of think about this. One, in like the realpolitik of it, you could say there's going to be a Pareto distribution, right? 80% of people are going to use this for hyper-hedonic kind of things. 10% to 15% of people are going to use it for that plus like some professional kind of thing. Maybe you're an architect or whatever. And then there's going to be some small subset of people that really like try to answer these questions. And frankly, by the way, like I call these people like the new prophetic class. Like I really think you'll see really interesting social and economic systems go beneath these people, and in a kind of a novel way. I don't even know what that really looks like, but it's just an inkling that I have. But so that's how you can kind
of
of
a class of drug users from the last generation.
Well, I mean, I think it would be more like your Timothy Learys and your Ram Dasses. If they had, a Shopify store. but I don't know. I think, I have this hope that if we do a good job in our marketing and the experience does, what we want, that they'll kind of, it's like like I have no doubt that people will still fly and sleep with their favorite celebrity or something like that. But I do hope that like, also you kind of hedonically equilibrate eventually and you realize like, wait, I could like make a building appear out of the ground. Like I could talk to my dead grandmother. I could talk to a man from history, etc., whatever, that I'm very interested in talking to. What's very interesting, by the way, to maybe explain that is like, if you lost your like grandmother, like I did, for example, when I was an adult, I knew her as an adult, and so my conversations with her, she responds in a way that's very much like what I realize. It's like an LLM almost in some sense.
Well, I was gonna say it's an LLM. It's like the first time you can rag this sort of memory ever.
Yeah,
That's really interesting.
Yeah, and so.
Well, by the way, are lucid dreams that directable when you're having them?
So lucidity is a spectrum. Right. And how lucid you are is essentially, kind of what we're kind of hypothesizing is essentially the delta of how active this neural circuit is when you're awake versus when you're in a dream. And so, I've had, many lucid dreams in my life. I've had, probably what I would call 50 percentile lucid dreams where you're kind of aware, but you're kind of still along for the ride. Maybe you can like change like your
You
angles
almost have
on
to realize
things.
while you're in it that it's happening.
And then you have lucid dreams where you're in like basically full control. And so that's really the experience that we're aiming for is that kind of 90th percentile lucid dream.
Thinking from a you perspective, and then we'll get back to the market overall. Neuromodulation. Teach me about it from the perspective of what does it literally mean when I'm going to use the first version of your product? How much of that also, I think you've been making this point in subtle ways throughout our conversation of this is all accessible today. What we're doing is make it easier, more standardizable, more generalizable. So how much of it is like about technology to understand a thing that is possible? So teach me about it, and then teach me about today's nature of it.
Yeah, first of all, I mean, it is very much an emerging technology. It's been around for 2 decades. So transcranial focused ultrasound, what you'll have, right, generally is a piece of PZT or piezoelectric material. It can be many different types of things that have, but you really want something that has a high piezoelectric coefficient, which just means that you can transfer a lot of energy. And then you'll have a mashing layer, which is just this layer that deals with something called acoustic impedance, which I won't get into like too much. And then like maybe a lens. And this is a single element transducer that I'm describing. So we're talking about one single piece of PCT, which means that you're creating one focal beam. And if you were to want to move it, you would have to mechanically steer it. You could adjust depth, but if you want to laterally move it or up and down, etc. So you have a lens and so on and so forth.
I'm imagining, by the way, like in my head, there's like a diagram of an eye.
Yeah, I could see that, you can think about it like in some sense. I think that's actually even a way that maybe I would think about it. Right, it produces this, focused ultrasound beam, right? Which essentially, right, is vibrating the neurons, causing, the potassium or potentially the potassium and calcium to kind of, trigger and maybe triggers a firing. There's also, there's excitatory protocols where you can, excite something. There's also inhibitory protocols, and so on and so forth. And it's been around for 2 decades. It's been used to induce everything from deep meditative states to, elation.
And is it as simple as an on-off? So let's, if a neural pathway controls some experience, and you can influence it with this. Is it deterministic or is it probabilistic?
So this has actually always been one of the things that's very, very difficult with ultrasound and brain modulation broadly is how do you deliver a consistent generalizable experience? Because it's like sometimes you do it and it's such hits, for some people. And then for some people, you could do the same exact thing, target the same exact region, and it doesn't. And that could be because of varying skull thicknesses, attenuations in the skull. There's like a variety of things that could play for this. And that's actually where the 2 other kind of pieces of this kind of closed loop system that we have. There's, we have EEG, we also do fNIRS. Again, so taking neural data in real time and basically, and then using a transformer architecture. And this transformer architecture is taking that neural data in real time, or rather, maybe it's you pulse, you look at the neural data, you see how did it respond to that, and then you adjust the parameters. And what's great is so we have single element transducers, and this is what we've been doing really to date. But we're also building multi-element transducer systems right now, which will have a pretty cool.
And so if I try to wrap that back to you in lay terms, it's like each of these is essentially a laser beam.
Yeah, sure.
To some neural pathway, and to do this effectively cannot be one shot. It's several prompt. And it's the ability to analyze what's happening and say, I need to make rapid adjustments to whatever I'm trying to impacting your brain.
Yeah.
To actually get to some desired outcome deterministically.
So I would say that, in terms of one shot or whatever, at least in our experience of doing just single element transducers with no EEG and no transformer architecture, like when we were starting out, we actually really saw like basically a normal distribution, bell curve of, there was like a 50 percentile of people who they felt things. There are people, 10% of people felt nothing and 10% of people felt it like quite considerably. But you just want this ability to use this real-time neural feedback data, neural data and use the beauty of a transformer architecture to like figure out the spatial temporal firing patterns of that you're targeting and see like what's doing maybe increasing gamma, which would indicate like high levels of neuronal activity in this given region that you're focused on. So that's kind of this kind of the kind of closed system. But what I would say is one thing that, so we've done tFUS, for two decades and done, really amazing experiences. No one's used it to try to induce lucidity. The neural circuit of lucidity, has been, theorized actually for a long time. And we've seen it in the sparse, but very, very interesting, fMRI and EEG studies. And we work, we collaborate with something called the Donders Institute at the Rabban University in the Netherlands, where we're doing the largest simultaneous EEG and fMRI study with them on lucidity. Or lucid dreamers, I should say. So yeah, I mean, and so I think, the technology is very much matured. Like you can build a consumer. Again, I mean, if I was really, unambitious, I could probably commercialize what I have today. I don't think that it's, I don't think that's $1 billion company. I could be wrong, but I don't think it's $1 billion company. And that's not what you raise venture capital, to do. Like, and so I think you need to have this like magical experience. And so that's why we're targeting, the brain state of lucid dreaming.
Is someone going to build a version of this that allows us all to gaslight ourselves? I say that, by the way, positively. I think of gaslighting yourself as being one of the most powerful things you can possibly do as a human being. The ability to and I think this is part of what you're talking about, even with lucid dreams, is like your ability to tell yourself stories and understand yourself and therefore direct yourself intentionally. Can be really magical. And it sounds like you're focused on lucid dreaming for a variety of reasons that I think are actually like related to some greater cause. But I'm curious, it feels like that's also something this technology could enable.
When you think about like when consciousness reacts with or interacts with reality, basically stories happen.
Right.
That's like what's happening. Right. And actually,
you're perceiving your POV, you're perceiving other people's POV or not. You're adjusting over time.
Absolutely. And when I think about actually kind of the birth of storytelling in humans, I look at Carl Jung and Joseph Campbell, and it's like, well, why were they so right? And I really think it's actually because people woke up, Neolithic humans, right, woke up. They get around a fire and they say, you wouldn't fucking believe what I saw last night. And I really think that like dreams were very much a genesis point of storytelling. And if anything, I would like to see a 21st century version of that. Dreams are inherently entropic, and humans create structures that create negentropy. And so naturally, lucid dreaming is like literally one of the most negentropic things you can do, right? You are literally in control of the narrative, the environment, whatever. I mean, obviously, like the environment can change, etc. when you like stop focusing on it. But like, it's a very negentropic thing. Naturally, humans were going to do this, and the types of stories that they're going to tell are going to be different as a result. And we might learn something or create new archetypes and new things. I don't know. But I, that's my hope. It's like this kind of 21st century dream culture, which fundamentally changes the types of stories we tell both ourselves and each other, and then the stories that we embark on together.
Eric, this has been a fantastic course number 1.
Yeah.
Course number 2.
I've enjoyed it. Let's do it.
Sweet. All right, course 2 of 3 Course Founders. Eric, we're going to be doing some mutual founder therapy.
Yeah.
I vote that we start with a cheers of an oyster.
Okay, let's
Shall we?
Yeah.
Yeah, let's grab. Cheers to you.
Cheers, man.
Oh,
Love that.
course 2. I'm going to start right away. I can't even wait. It's mutual founder therapy. Ooh, that was a good oyster.
That was good.
We get into the weeds of the hard stuff that people don't really talk about, because people will talk about it's hard to know whether to send DocSend or a PDF. It's you have to create your lead list and make sure you target the right partner at a venture fund when you're fundraising. But there are much harder things to startups, and that's what I want to talk about, and do some mutual founder therapy and storytelling that'll hopefully be helpful to early stage folks out there. And when we were talking about this, a couple things I think we're going to talk about. I want to start with something you shared around when you first started the company and you needed some outsiders to believe in you.
Yeah.
Maybe you took the wrong approach.
Yeah. So I left my previous job on a Wednesday, and that Friday, Silicon Valley Bank blew up. And that was probably like the worst fundraising environment since 1999.
People were unsure if they had any money in their
Right, yeah, fair, right? And so it was a brutal fundraising environment. Here I am, first time deeptech founder. Like I've done a lot of things, know a lot of people, but like, it's a crazy idea. And I'm like, I was like, people are very risk off right now. What I need to be is I need to be this extremely buttoned up, even keel guy I was engaged at the time, and I remember I was like, bring up that you're engaged a lot, because like they'll be like, he's stable. There's something stable about him. I was so obsessed with this kind of counterbalancing act with my idea, and things were not going well in the fundraising. I mean, it was taking a long time, a lot of no's, which is, by the way, par for the course. That's just part of your job.
Yep.
And I had a dinner with my father, and I was telling him what was going on. And he's like, well, how do you pitch? And I brought up this thing, that I do this thing.
Ooh, you brought it up to someone who knows you best.
Yeah.
Wow.
And he said, well, there's your problem. And I was just like, what do you mean? And he was like, listen, like, first of all, like, people who talk to a lot of people, which, right, like investors are constantly talking to people, like have great bullshit detectors, and could probably discern. And like, he's like, you're a really great actor, but like, I really don't think like, most people probably can like see that like you're like couching something, and then that's actually concerning and risky. Like, what are you hiding? And then, but more importantly, he was saying, he's like, listen, all you have right now, realistically, is a passion, some experience in the space broadly, like in tech and venture, and a story. And the question is are you the protagonist in that story? And he said the protagonist is not of your story is not even keel. He is not just like kind of a normie, kind of like guy. He's there's an eccentricity to him, and you have to be that. And I shit you not, like, I'm not even kidding. Like, the second I started doing that, like a month later, or something like that, like the round was closed. So that was a really important piece of advice. Like, that probably changed, whether or not I got to do this, was just like not overthinking like the fundraise and trying to like be somebody for your investors. It's like, actually, like, they're going to be able to tell, and and two, especially at that early stage, like, that's what they're investing in, is, are you the protagonist in the story of this company?
This story folds into so much, but I also have a fundraising story that is similar that I want to share. The way our Series A starts in late 2021 is struggle bus. For some reason, it's just not biting. We're meeting folks who had kept track of free agency, folks were excited, but it just wasn't hitting. And I was getting on the phone with our investors. People were giving me feedback. I was changing the deck, as one sometimes does every day, tweaking. And Bloomberg Beta was one of the co-leads of our seed round.
Oh, sick.
And our partner there is Karen, who's wonderful. But one of the other partners there is Roy Bahat, who, if you know Roy Bahat, he's like me, a person who's not afraid, and like you, not afraid to tell you what he's thinking and be a little more challenging. And so we're in this meeting because, the Series A isn't hitting and they wanted to meet. So fine, I'll spend this time. It was Karen and him on the phone, and there's a slide where I have an LTV to CAC ratio, for those who don't know, lifetime value to cost of customer acquisition, that is really, really high.
Nice.
The reason for that is because we have a very high ticket price. As a service, we provide Hollywood-style representation tech talent, so it's 5-10% of someone's income. And the sales motion we had developed was super cheap and effective, because this was a very new product at the time where talent had a lot of optionality and wanted to maximize. So they really identified with this idea of this service, saying, I'm going to make you more money and get you a better job, and in the way you're going to take some of it, great.
Totally.
But he's on the phone giving feedback as to why this deck might not be working. He goes like, what is this number? This number seems fake. No, that's the real number, and it's not just a cohort number. I believe this number is sustainable over time. Market change is notwithstanding. And we have this negative interaction. It's so negative in terms of like, I'm going like, Roy, it's a real number. Why would I not put this real number? It has an explanation under it, all this other stuff. Karen called me after that call to like check in on, which I'm not the person to check in on, but she still wanted to be like, hey, I'm checking on you after that confrontation. It was so annoying to me that day I said, I'm doing this wrong. Mm-hmm. This has never been me. Mm-hmm. I don't listen and adjust no matter what someone says. I'm going to hear you.
Yeah.
But I shouldn't edit it every night. What am I doing?
Totally. I never do that. Yeah.
New draft. Actually, it was new draft, but then I opened my first draft, which had changed so much.
Yeah.
I mostly duplicated that, but went, okay, like, what's true? How do I want to tell this story? Not only do I think the LTV to CAC ratio, I want to bring back the order of the slides that I thought was best, this, that, or other thing. A couple other investors had ticked me off. Like you said, instantly, once I was telling the story, I wanted to tell where I was the protagonist, where I was not attempting to win somebody else's game, but instead to win my game, my sharp edge. We give this advice to our job-seeking clients all the time. You will not win at someone else's game. What's your sharp edge?
Yeah.
If you are a non-technical PM, you're not getting the technical PM job. either don't compete for that job, or by the way, compete because the benefits of whatever context you do bring are good enough to override that.
Right.
Same thing in our stories. There's this thing where in your world, I totally get why you decided, hey, I need to be counterintuitively something they haven't seen in a while because these are different times.
Yeah.
And for me, I was, I have this moment that seems to be going well and yet people aren't responding to it. Let me just respond to what they're saying to me.
Right.
And it's this ability to understand your own game is so much more persuasive.
Sure. Yeah.
It's also so much more about the long term. When you are buttoning up or I'm telling someone else's story, it kind of falls off. Like you can't envision the person running that playbook in 5 years, even if they're telling you about it today. And more than anything too, there's this concept people will say, like, find the investors who want to invest already in your idea or concept. That's hard. It requires too much optionality, but it is this idea of, because they're underwriting you as a person, what you are trying to find is people who are philosophically aligned with
1,000%.
And that's the thing that I think gets lost when we adjust our stories the way we did.
Yeah.
We were not telling the philosophical story that allows somebody to go, I want to be in this marriage of investing in you, being on your board, all this other stuff.
Totally. I mean, so Box Group led our pre-seed. Great. They're such a great firm. And they do a really great job. Like, you kind of meet like everyone on the investment team. And it was the day before my wedding, or the day before I was leaving to go to my wedding. And I basically get put in a room with like everyone other than David Tish, who started and runs it. And I'm just... And I think this is truly the first conversation I had after this dinner with my father. And I just skits out. Like, for this meeting, I am talking, a mile a minute. I'm telling them the honest truth of why I'm starting this, the vision and what I think will happen to the world if this works, etc. And talking, saying things like, the Darwins of consciousness. These you can imagine, right? And I remember it was like the end, and nobody was saying anything. Like, they were just listening. And then, like, it kind of stops. I have to leave because I had to give my friend some stuff to bring up to the wedding. And I was like, actually, I'm really sorry. My fiance is going to kill me. Like, I got to go to my wedding. They were like, oh my God, like, go. And
great signal to them, by the way, you being you, doing that call before your wedding. I mean,
no, and I was in the office. I had to go all the way back to, I was living in Lyon City at the time. And I remember Adam from Box Group who said, this has got to be the first pitch I've ever heard where somebody invoked the HMS Beagle, which was the ship that Darwin's. And anyway, and and actually, if I know we talked about this before, but I'd like to tell this story just because I think for people who are potentially who are watching this thinking about starting a company, I think it's really important to hear stories like this, which is, I was really close to personal bankruptcy. Like, I self-funded like the first tranche of the company. My technical co-founder Wes, who's extraordinary, and I can tell you how I met him, et cetera, and so on and so forth. But we didn't know each other that well, and it's really important to kind of establish trust and keep them there. He was probably the most real thing about the company in some sense, because he was highly technical. And I said to him, no matter what, on May 31st, you're getting your first paycheck. And I paid him directly out of my bank account. I think there was like $1,200 in that Mercury account at the time. And I was like, shit, how many times can I do this? You know what I mean? So I have this meeting with Box Group. It goes really well. I think it goes really well. I think I had one phone call with David. And then I go to the wedding. And it's the day before my wedding. I'm sitting at this hotel pool, the pool at this hotel that I can't afford, right? And I'm sitting there, I'm lying there, and I'd gone on a bachelor party and felt extraordinarily guilty about it. Like, I was hemorrhaging money, and it just, like, I tried to have a good time. I really appreciated the people, but it was whatever. And I prayed for the first time since I had been in Israel, and I simply asked, all I said was, I just want to enjoy my wedding. Within 60 or 90 seconds, a gentleman who I won't name hits me up and says, oh my God, Eric, I'm so sorry. I hope I didn't stress you out before your wedding. I just signed the safe and just queued the wire. I'm not even kidding. When I say 60 seconds, I really think that was roughly the time. And now this was 25 grand. It wasn't a lot of money. But man, when you're like, how many times? I was like, okay, I could at least pay Wes for a little while, right? We have the wedding. Wedding's amazing. Get married, kids. We go to her grandmother is very generous and gave us her condo in St. Pete's, Florida. I couldn't, afford a honeymoon. I just went on my honeymoon 14 months after I started this company. And like on a Tuesday, I get a phone call. OSV Jim O'Shaughnessy's fund is like, puts in 100 grand. And then that Thursday, now at the time, because it was such a bad fundraising environment, we were just trying to raise $500,000.
Right.
Box Group comes in, calls me and they say, we want to put in $750,000. So from Thursday to Thursday, I went from having $1,200 in the business bank account to nearly $1 million. And we ended up raising $1.4 million on the pre-seed. And, I tell everyone like this is like, when you're like starting a company, it's like you're driving a jet like straight down to the earth like 1,600 miles an hour. And, every time you have a setback, you're basically asking yourself like, should I pull up?
Right.
And should I pull up? Should I pull up?
Right.
And, I think, to be honest, if
the
you
other
are...
question, by the way, is how close am I to the ground?
Yeah, exactly, for sure, right. 1,000%. And my personal view on this is like, if you are not willing to drive it into the ground, you might really want to reconsider starting a company, because, again, just so everyone remembers, right? Like most of these planes crash.
Yeah.
So you have to be right. Even if you raise that pre-seed round, like the chances are you're still going to crash. Like you might start getting altitude and one of the engine fails, and you try to put it out, and maybe you can even get like the engine fixed and you go fucking higher, and you could still collapse.
It is an ability to not die.
Yeah.
And not allow time to beat you by default. And one of the things about the way that played out for you is moments before you could have had a conversation with your co-founder where you said, go do something else.
Yeah. Yep.
But you decided to have confidence in a version of not only the startup, yourself, that relationship, to say, I'm going to go faster towards the ground.
Yeah, exactly.
Because ultimately, again, there could have been a different conversation. Right. And if you say to that co-founder, maybe you can get him back when he goes in, but maybe in a week he has a new job, and the things don't work out exactly as planned and all this other stuff. And it's so interesting to think of how many, a phrase my team sometimes makes fun of me for, I say, things just go with the wind. If you're interviewing somebody and you're in a bad mood, you might just reject them because it's not their fault, that's life. And the same thing is true for some of these very high stakes things. The stuff is trivial.
Right.
The existence of your company, the fundraise of many companies, the decision to not close, the decision for a co-founder to stick around on something, it is the wind, and you have to decide, is this a version of the wind? Is this a moment in time where I want to attempt to ride the wind, control the wind, ignore the wind, whatever it is? Yeah. Or face the wind head on in your case.
Yeah, totally.
Eric, that was fantastic. Course number 2. Let's hit course number 3.
All right, man.
Cheers to you and to the future of lucid dreaming. So course 3 is a fun one, as we have dessert. So too, we have the gift of insights from your friends, your founder friends who know you best, who you picked.
Yeah.
What you didn't pick is their responses to my questions about you.
Sure.
And I want to use their responses to understand even more about you.
Okay.
If we can use them as a lens to people who know you better.
Okay.
The first thing.
Do I get to know who asked these?
No, I'll tell you after. The first thing, I think this is like the more serious version, but a good question.
Sure.
It's I don't know if I knew this until the person pointed it out to me. Like you're non-technical of a very technical company. Yeah. And obviously it's very technical, not in like also the software engineering I'm sure is complicated, but it's technical also in the science of it, and it's technical in the depth of that science of it. Yeah. And his point was, he's been able to do this literally from a conception standpoint, an understanding of the science standpoint, a recruiting of a highly technical team standpoint.
Yeah.
How?
So I was thinking about this already in 2017, 2018, and was reading, I was not afraid to read research papers. I think that's also like very helpful. It's just like,
totally.
You got to be able to like read that stuff and interface with it. You have to be okay with the fact that you're probably going to grok like 40, 50%, 60, 70% at fucking best,
Which, by the way, sometimes is like, most of it isn't that useful anyway.
Exactly, yeah, totally. And I think like one thing that I have is like good pattern matching. Yeah. And so I was just able to kind of like read these things and pattern match and kind of build a story. I can tell a story to myself pretty well. And like, and so like over the years, I kept close to this research over time. And so while I'm not technical, I very much had context at least on like what, like I knew how this stuff worked at a surface level. And I even knew kind of how like, I had an idea of like, I was good at like looking at like, okay, like I understood tFUS, but I knew that you would need some kind of real-time neural data, and you would need something that would be able to like generate insights from that. It's like, okay, transform architectures, and like, okay, like so on and so forth. So I did have that, so that was beneficial, right? Like, and
Gave
I
you
was
the
able
context to begin to understand enough of a baseline to then know what else you needed to know.
Exactly. So I would say it's at its most pragmatic, I was able to create an investor pitch because I did the fundraising, like Wes was involved and so on and so forth. But like, frankly, like, and I'm sure Wes will be fine with this, is like, Wes was a name on the deck, like who was willing to be the CTO and co-founder.
Yeah. When he also validated your ability to grab him.
Facts. That is absolutely correct. But I had ability to tell a story to investors, and I had enough of an ability to tell a story to Wes. And I think that was probably the most important thing, was those two things at the outset.
Was that what it was to get him? Because that's obviously a huge thing to get that very technical co-founder, is like, because you became competent enough to have that conversation, or that's obviously part of it. So what percentage was that in you getting Wes, and what else was the composition of all the things that allowed you to grab somebody that's been so
Wes, sooner than like almost anyone, saw that brain-computer interfaces and transformer architectures were going to merge. And I found Wes because he was working with Grimes on neural arts stuff. And Grimes I followed Grimes. And she retweeted him pumping EEG data through a transformer architecture. I was like, holy shit, I need to meet this guy. We had a mutual friend. Wes would say, obviously, like, that we really connected, but like, I think, anyone who knew it, was looking at neuromodulation at the time, knew that tFUS like was the thing. It wasn't going to be like electrical stimulation. It's not going to be TMS. Certainly not, because like really you have to really know what you're doing. The idea putting that in a commercial form factor is really tough. But electrical stimulation just doesn't have the depth, the precision, the steerability that tFUS has. And so, Wes, when he saw that, he was really convinced. And then moreover, when he understood that we weren't creating a dream state, we were waiting for you to enter a dream and then basically making you aware in it. And so when he understood that, those two things, I think from a technical perspective, he looked at like the stuff that was being done with tFUS. He was already looking at tFUS, and he said, reasoning from first principles, I don't see why this couldn't work.
It was almost his own validation of your pseudo-technical mind putting together a bunch of different puzzle pieces and going, okay, there's not only enough here from the concept standpoint, I'm impressed he put it together, and there's a pathway forward, and I can help accelerate that pathway forward.
I think that's probably it. And then also, you continue to learn, right? So you continuously learn. So like, I am more technical in the sense of understanding the various components of what we really build. I do not build them, but I understand exactly what's going on. And I think that's really important. I mean, it'd be a really scary, weird world where like if I didn't really understand it, but and the team is also, first of all, also being able to recruit people. Like, I won't talk too much about it, but we've recently like hired a guy who's like a non-trivial hire. And he loved, what Wes, of course, but I think if I was like some kind of, purely storytelling kind of, just had a vision, but wasn't really involved or couldn't speak to him about the technology, that would be probably a big red flag for somebody like that.
One of your friends said that you are a master at explaining things.
That's nice of him.
Even to people who have no idea what you're building, or when you're deep into a new subject. It's a skill that I think a lot of founders have a little bit, but I agree that you have it a lot, because you have a complicated thing that you're building, and you're always excited to tell a story that people can relate to or feel or imagine off of. Where'd you learn it?
Okay. I was a debater in high school.
Interesting.
I was one of the few. I think I was the only person in the state of New York history who didn't drop a negative ballot. So, but I was really bad at winning the affirmative. So I was very good at like disagreeing. Very bad about making a case for something in there. But
there's something that's
so that's a very good way to kind of learn certain types of things. I think maybe actually, but the thing is that I really think it's super important, and I'll tell you why. Is that when people are obfuscating things or talking like with jargon or whatever, I basically de facto think they're lying.
You're very earnest. It's the same thing around like if you hear someone say something with jargon, it's like, that's not earnest. You're very earnest. If you're going to use jargon, you're not doing it to try to hide something. You're doing it because it's a necessary part of the thing you're explaining.
Right.
And you also want, I think, based on my experiences with you want people to understand what you're talking about, what you're thinking.
Totally. I mean, first of all, that's very kind of you to say. I really appreciate it. I think like, by the way, like you can be very confident and earnest at the same time. There's like, I think this weird thing where people think that like, you're kind 100%. Of like you're a bit of a pushover or something, or you either.
I will say, people used to give this criticism of Vox Media
that they were like the explainers in chief, and that like all their articles just tried to over-explain to you whatever technology or policy or whatever wonky thing they're trying to describe.
Right.
I took personal. I wasn't even a big reader of books. I took like personal offense that I'm like the biggest explainer in chief.
Right.
Because I want to put as much of my thought out there as possible, both for it to be investigated, interrogated, and understood.
Yeah.
I didn't understand that critique for a long time because I didn't think of them as not confident. I thought of them as just purely earnest.
Yeah.
And they wrote with confidence, but they were still kind of dinged, to your point, as like, look at them. They're not just doing memes and headlines. They're trying to put words in your head. And it's interesting, like, why do we associate a lack of confidence with earnestness?
So, and I love this about the United States at some level, but like, right, this is the country that invented the snake oil salesman. I mean, there's something that is just...
it's attractive.
Yeah, well, I mean, there is something like, narratives and storytelling and like, sometimes it's outright fraud. Sometimes, right, like I'm not making a comparison between these two people at all, but like, right, you have like kind of, Sam Bankman-Fried or whoever the woman is from fNIRS, right? What was her name? Elizabeth Holmes. And
well, we love storytellers, right? And what are those two people? Yeah.
I mean, let's use Elizabeth Holmes because I think where it's like she really like said she had a product that she simply didn't have.
Yeah.
And then you have like somebody like Elon who like tells you where the puck is going, maybe like the timeline too optimistically, but like at least the guy delivers.
Yeah.
And the market, right? This wouldn't happen in any other like capital market system. You would not see people investing in Tesla with with the assumption of something like autonomous robotic taxis. In the United States, you do, and so I think one of the reasons why some of this is rewarded is sometimes like a story. Like there are examples, right, in America in particular, where telling a good story does work out. And then there's also, I would say, like, there are some people who are just really fucking annoying and like the explaining, like, oh, but like, did you think of this? And they don't actually ever do anything. They're like this like hyper, it's this hyper, Americans are not intellectual.
We don't want it. Like, we don't want it to be a scold.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's just,
it's explaining it for a purpose, not to prove that I know more.
If you've ever spent like a considerable amount of time, in Europe or in developed East Asia, they're very intellectual societies. Like, you go to like, Europe in particular, at least from my experience, and they've read like everything. They've read dlPFC, they've read like, and they're so read. And when they talk about something, they just over intellectualize the shit out of it. And Americans are either doing one of two things. Either they've just done the thing, or they're doing the thing, and sometimes they're like even flying by, or they're telling some story about a thing they are going to do. And it's a very simple story. And so I think there's something there. I genuinely believe that there's something deeply cultural about this. Yeah. Where earnestness isn't really, that kind of framework isn't necessarily suited to that. But if you're a confident and earnest person, I'm sure Warren Buffett is both earnest and confident. I'm sure he is. He's extremely successful in American society. So I think that might be coming back into vogue. I think the greatest generation very much were confident, but they were very earnest, right? And I think maybe it'd be nice if we rediscover that to a certain degree.
1,000% agree with you. I think we need it.
Yeah.
My last question is going to be a request from someone who knows you best of all, which is yourself.
Okay.
What's the thing you're working on as a founder? What's the thing you need to get better at?
If I had to choose one, I would say that this is like not too interesting. I think like you might hear this other places, or I don't know if people would ever say this. I don't really know what the incentive is to say it publicly, but when you're fundraising, right, you start the fundraise with your Airtable and everything's well labeled, and you have like your hit list, and okay, I'm gonna go tier 3, tier 2, tier 1, and like I have this whole idea. The difference between somebody who runs like a clean process and not is the person who kind of basically just like at some point during that process just freaks the fuck out and is just like, nope, shooting from the hip. And I'd say that I've definitely done that, But I'll tell you the reason why I even ended up in that scenario in the first place was I was too slow to adjust the new reality of tech and venture, so a lot of the meat of my career in tech was during the ZERP era where money was abundant, storytelling was very much rewarded, And you can raise a lot of money for certain things, and you could also do momentum raising in a certain way. And so there was all these things that I had learned and ascertained, and I was too slow to adjust. And even though I actually had like the goods for this, I think I'm actually a better suited founder for this environment than I would have been for the previous one. And so I think, I didn't I would basically we would do something that was splashy and get a lot of, like hype. And so then I'd be like, time to fundraise. You know what I mean? Whereas really what you want to do, right, is like you actually are executing pretty aggressively against a pretty impressive technology roadmap. And you just want to have as much of that, because that's your leverage in your fundraise. And so I think that's something that I just I guess now I know that. So that's probably maybe cheating the question of but I am working on, I guess, you just want to make sure that you fundraise in the proper way. I think I failed to do that. And moreover, I think it was, I too slowly adjusted to the new reality of the fact is that when interest rates are 5.5%, you better have something because, money is worth something. They can put their fund, these LPs could put their money in a money market fund, and so I think, that was something that I think I've gotten there a lot, but I think that's something that we'll definitely have to continue to work on. And I think a lot of people, frankly, who've been, especially people who are probably around our age or something like that, where you matured in that, in that environment, you become accustomed to it and you kind of you're too slow to adjust to it.
Eric, this has been fantastic. Three courses. Well done.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Founders are going to learn a lot from you. So keep building it, and we can't wait to all Lucid Dream.
Looking forward to it.
Awesome.
Cheers.
That's it.
Listen, the crass joke in the lucid dreaming community is the first two things people do in a lucid dream is fly or fuck. You know what I mean?
Funny.
And if that's all I created, I'd feel horrible.